All right, welcome everybody to another Art Brunch presentation. I want to ask some of you to stay a little bit longer at the end for a discussion because I have a special announcement to make. So I invite you to be a part of that if you are able to. Those who have to leave either before I end or shortly thereafter, just let me know and I will contact you directly regarding what was discussed. Right, we begin a new series, a 5-part series. It's titled Art and the Spiritual Life, and today we will be discussing truth. Now, any discussion of truth should begin with hesitation, with humility. So I will try not to make any strong declarations today. Perhaps I should begin with a question, one which I think lives within most of us, considering the general unease of our present moment. Here it is. What if the greatest problem that we face, personally or culturally or spiritually, is not that we lack meaning, not that we lack connection, not even that we lack love, but that we have lost the capacity to see clearly what is real, to discern what is true. We live in a time that is, in many ways, the most visually saturated in human history. Images flood every screen. Perspectives multiply by the hour. Information cascades into noise. And yet, beneath all of that stimulation, there is a strange, quiet anxiety that I suspect many of you have felt. An anxiety not easily named, but something like, can I still trust what I see? Can I still trust what I hear? Can I still recognize truth? I want to suggest something. It's both ancient and, I think, quite radical, that our present age has largely begun to reject, or at least doubt, and that is the idea that truth does indeed correspond to reality. Now, in place of that claim, our present age champions the relativity of truth claims. Well, today I want to challenge that and present the idea that truth is not something we create. It is not a product of our preferences, our politics, or our emotional state. Perhaps the best way to put it is this way. Truth might just be something we discover. And more significantly, truth is something we must learn to see. Now, I have not always agreed with this. In fact, for a decade or more, I subscribed to the skepticism of Friedrich Nietzsche regarding truth. Truth to him was impossible to grasp in its fullness, and all of our truth claims were really descriptions of information that had some utility for us, that helped us solve problems. But those descriptions we came up with may or may not actually correspond to the reality of the way the world and the cosmos actually are. So in other words, there was no way of knowing for sure what was really true. Nietzsche was skeptical of all truth claims, in other words. And this idea was picked up by American pragmatists like William James, who argued that truth is merely what works. It was taken up by John Dewey and later philosophers like Richard Rorty, whom I studied in depth, and also adopted by postmodern thinkers. All truth claims, it was now argued, were really based on personal preferences. And the truth claims that won were based on the desire for power and control. In other words, might makes right became might makes truth. But the art we will see today expresses a different idea about truth and its knowability. Now, I believe art has always been one of the most powerful instruments human beings have developed for learning to see and feel reality as it truly is. Not reality as we wish it were, not reality as our tribe tells us it is, but reality in its full depth, its full weight, its full beauty and terror. So let us begin. In our current cultural moment, truth has been democratized, which sounds like a good thing until we examine what that actually means. We hear phrases now that would have bewildered previous generations. Things like, that may be true for you, or I'm speaking my truth. Now, these phrases sound right, and so they carry real emotional weight. They gesture towards something important, the dignity of individual experience, the ways that power shapes whose stories get told. But they also reveal something else, a quiet loss of confidence that reality itself is stable, knowable, and meaningful, independent of our perception of it. The ancient world and the classical philosophical and theological traditions that grew from it offered a very different vision. For Plato, truth was not a product of the mind, but the object of the mind's highest aspiration. The forms, the eternal unchanging structures of reality were more real than the shifting appearances of the material world. And the philosopher's task was to turn from the shadows on the cave wall and look toward the light, where these forms that represented what was truly real existed. For Thomas Aquinas, the great philosopher of medieval Christianity, who was influenced most by Aristotle, for him, truth was defined with elegant precision. Truth, he said, is the conformity of the intellect to reality, not the conformity of reality to the intellect. No, the conformity of the intellect to reality. The alignment, the bending of the mind toward what actually is. Now, let me pause for you to read that quote. Go ahead and take a moment with it. Do you believe Aquinas was right? Or do you want to challenge him? If Aquinas is correct, then this changes everything. Because it means that now we see through a glass darkly. But that being so, truth still is not merely subjective. It is not what I feel to be the case. It is not what my community has agreed to call real. Truth is what is, whether or not I perceive it, whether or not it comforts me, whether or not it serves my interests. Truth, then, is really a problem of our perception. For yes, we see through a glass darkly, but that doesn't mean we can't see some of what actually is true and is real. Obviously, perceiving truth is not always easy. In fact, it is the work of a lifetime. It is also a work of approximation, since we may never fully grasp it. But the difficulty of seeing clearly does not mean that there is nothing to see. So we do not have the freedom to make up our own truth or claim it is all relative. The sun is real even when the clouds obscure it. And the discipline of learning to see, that is what this presentation is about this morning. The discipline of learning to see. In both Western and Eastern thought, truth is more than correspondence to brute facts. Truth is participation in a reality that may not be visible or even tangible. But just because we cannot see something or quantify it does not mean it is not intelligible. This world, this cosmos we are living in, and which is partly obscured from us because of our physical and intellectual limitations, can still be known. It has an inner order, an inner logic, an inner meaning that the mind can, with patience and discipline, begin to grasp, though perhaps never perfectly, but increasingly. George Sand said, "To be made evident, truth must be sought for of itself it is slow to appear. And between ourselves and God, the obstacles to truth are so many." Discovering the truth about anything, then, is not easy. That I want to be clear about. But the effort it takes to find it is worth the effort. And here is a big claim I'm going to make. I believe that we have a moral obligation to try to recognize truth. Truth can only be apprehended by those who have learned, slowly and painfully, to see. Our ability to see and experience truth more and more clearly requires intention, and it requires work. It requires a willingness to both challenge and expand our perspective. And it always begins with humility. I know that I do not know. It is the slow, difficult, costly discipline of learning to let go of illusion. Truth requires our concentrated attention. This is precisely what great art trains. Art usually does not give us information, but art very often slows us down. Art confronts us with what we would otherwise move past too quickly to notice. Art creates the conditions for genuine attention. And in creating those conditions, art, the greatest art, the art that endures, teaches us something about how to live. It teaches us to see. It invites us to expand our perspective so we can gain greater understanding of reality. So let us now look at some art that may help us expand our perception. This, of course, is one of the most famous images in Western civilization, and also one of the most intellectually sophisticated. At the center of Raphael's The School of Athens, two figures move toward us. Plato, the idealist, pointing upward toward the eternal realm of forms, and Aristotle, his student, gesturing outward toward the observable world. Around them, arranged in conversation and argument, are nearly every major philosopher of antiquity. Now notice what Raphael is doing in this work. He is not declaring a winner. He is not telling us that Plato was right or that Aristotle was right. Instead, he's staging a question, the deepest question in the philosophy of truth. Where is reality ultimately located? Is it in the eternal, unchanging forms that Plato sought, beyond this world of appearance? Or is it here, in the particular, the sensory, the empirical, as Aristotle insisted? This tension in this work is not resolved, but it is dramatized. And in being dramatized, it invites us, requires us to enter the question ourselves. This is the first lesson of great art about truth. The truth is not always simple. It does not fit on a bumper sticker. It requires philosophical courage, the willingness to sit with the question rather than collapse it into a quick, easy, comfortable answer. Zooming in on a few parts of it, notice also the extraordinary variety of postures in this painting. Thinkers arguing, demonstrating, calculating, meditating, lost in thought. This is a community of truth seekers. Truth, Raphael suggests then, is a practice, and it is best pursued in conversation with others who take the question seriously, followed by a time of deep reflection. Now let's move from the philosophical to the deeply personal.
Funny, I was just thinking about this painting.
Okay,
Like,
good.
it's crazy.
From the Academy of Raphael to a dark room in Rome. Caravaggio's masterpiece shows the moment described in the Gospel of Matthew. Christ enters a tax collector's booth and calls Matthew to follow him. But what makes this painting extraordinary is how Caravaggio renders what should be a moment of clarity as a moment of profound ambiguity. The light that enters the painting, Christ's light, falls obliquely across faces absorbed in money counting. And the hand that extends from the right, that hand is quiet, almost tentative. It's more like a question than a command. Zooming in, let's try to find Matthew. Which figure is Matthew? Scholars have debated this for centuries. He may be the bearded man pointing at himself in incredulous confusion as if to say, me? Can that possibly be for me? Or maybe he's not pointing to himself. Maybe he's pointing to the young man whose face is bent over the money at the end of the table. This is a painting about the peculiar quality of truth when it arrives in a life not yet ready to receive it. It does not come as overwhelming certainty. It does not come as blinding light, not yet. It comes as a moment of recognition, barely visible and easily missed, leaving us to ask, is this meant for me? Truth, Caravaggio tells us, is not only abstract and philosophical, it is deeply, uncomfortably personal. It finds us in the midst of ordinary life, and it does not wait for us to be ready. And our first response, Matthew's first response, is something like disbelief. Not me? Surely not me. How many of us have had that experience? The moment when something true, really true, pressed itself toward us, confronting our presuppositions and prejudices, and we looked away. We looked away because no one likes to have their perception, their prejudices, their certainties challenged. With Diego Velázquez, we arrive at one of the most philosophically complex paintings ever made, and one that anticipates by 3 centuries the question that postmodern philosophy would make central. At the center of Las Minas stands the Infanta Margarita, surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting, along with a court dwarf and a large dog. And to the left, barely visible behind a massive canvas, stands the painter himself, Velázquez, watching us, or perhaps watching something that we cannot see. Let me zoom in a bit. In the distant mirror on the back wall, or is it a painting? I don't know quite, but barely distinguishable are the reflections of 2 figures, the King and Queen of Spain. Are they the subject of the painting on the canvas that we cannot see, the one that Velázquez is painting? Are they the viewers of the scene we are witnessing? What's going on? I'd say this is not simply some parlor trick the painter is playing on us. Velázquez is making a serious argument about how we can know anything, that we are never merely neutral observers of reality. We are always participants in it. The very act of seeing changes what is seen. The observer is always inside the picture. Our awareness of this is wisdom. It is not relativism. It is not the claim that therefore nothing can be known. It is the more demanding claim that honest knowing requires self-knowledge, self-understanding. To see truth, we must first become aware of the lens through which we are looking and from what perspective we are looking. This is perhaps the most famous philosophical joke in the history of art, and also one of the most serious. Magritte paints a pipe, a beautifully rendered, perfectly realistic pipe. And beneath it, he writes in French, "This is not a pipe." It is not a pipe, of course. It is a painting of a pipe. We cannot fill it with tobacco. We cannot smoke it. It is a representation. And there is a chasm of difference between the representation and the thing represented. Now, we may laugh, but Magritte's point is entirely serious. We live surrounded by images. Most of what we think we know about the world, we know through images. Photographs, videos, social media posts, news broadcasts. And we have become so fluent in the language of images that we have largely stopped noticing that images are not reality. They're merely representations. They are framings. They are selections. Every image shows something and yet conceals a vast something else. The treachery of images, Magritte warns us, is not that they lie, it is that they look so much like truth that we forget to ask what they are leaving out. Political influencers thrive on this absence. To increase our capacity to recognize truth means cultivating a certain healthy suspicion of representations, including the representations we carry in our own minds of ourselves, of others, of our world. We have to remember that the image is not the reality. The map is not the territory. And the gap between representation and reality is where so much human bickering and suffering live. On April 26, 1937, 89 years ago this very month, the Basque town of Guernica was bombed by Nazi and fascist air forces in support of Franco's nationalist forces. Hundreds of civilians were killed. It was one of the first aerial bombardments of a civilian population in history. And Picasso responded with this painting. And it's worth pausing here to ask, why is this painting the right response? Why not a photograph? Why not a documentary report? Why not a realistic depiction of the carnage? Because Picasso understood something about truth that realism cannot capture, that the truth of atrocity is not primarily photographic. It is experiential and interior. It is the truth of what it feels like from the inside, the fragmentation, the dissolution of meaning, the shrieking of a world that no longer coheres. Guernica is rendered in black and white, the colors of newsprint, but also the colors of grief and shock. The figures are fractured, impossible, wrenched out of natural form. A horse screams. A mother cradles a dead child. A soldier's arm reaches upward from the ground, holding a shattered sword and a faint flower. This is not a documentation of an event. It is revelation. And that is the difference. A document tells us what happened. A revelation shows us what it meant, what it cost, what it continues to cost. So revelation of truth is often an experience of recognition, more than a process of deductive reasoning. Truth, Picasso insists, is not always beautiful. Beauty can wait, but truth, the truth of what human beings do to one another, the truth of what ideology does to flesh and bone, this cannot be beautified. It must be seen, looked at directly. It must be felt. And great art gives us a way to bear what would otherwise be unbearable, not by making it comfortable, but by making it meaningful. Well, we turn now to a different kind of truth-seeking, the truth of science, of inquiry, of the relentless human desire to understand what things are made of. Rembrandt's masterpiece shows a public dissection, a common practice in 17th century Amsterdam, where physicians would demonstrate human anatomy before audiences of students and curious citizens. Dr. Tulp holds a pair of forceps, demonstrating the mechanics of the forearm muscles. Around him, 7 figures lean in to observe. Look at the faces. They are not all the same. Some lean forward with intense curiosity. One glances toward us, as if to check whether we are truly watching or only pretending. And the face of one figure near the back is shadowed by something that looks like unease, even awe. Because to dissect a human body is not only a scientific act, it is also a confrontation with mortality. Here is what we are: muscle, tendon, nerve, bone. Here is what the self is housed in. Here is what the grave receives. The pursuit of truth has always come at a cost. It strips away illusion. It shows us what is actually there beneath the appearances. And what is actually there is not always comfortable. The greatest scientists, the greatest philosophers, the greatest spiritual seekers have all understood this. To love truth is to accept that it will sometimes dismantle what we thought we knew. And the willingness to accept that dismantling, that is what separates genuine truth-seeking from the mere performance of it. How many of us are willing to seriously question our political views, to entertain the thought that the lenses through which we perceive reality may need cleaning or serious adjustment? Do we have the moral courage to check our vision regularly? Well, we come now to the most extreme claim in this entire presentation. The claim that truth is not merely something we think, but something we live. And that living in truth may, at its outer limit, demand everything we have. In 399 BC, Socrates was put on trial by the city of Athens on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth. The charges were political. The real offense was philosophical. You see, Socrates had spent his life asking questions that powerful people preferred not to answer. He had exposed pretension, undermined comfortable certainty, and insisted again and again that the unexamined life is not worth living. He was found guilty and condemned to death. Now, he could have escaped. His friends arranged it. But he refused. because to flee would have been to betray everything he had said about truth, about law, about the examined life. He had lived in alignment with his understanding of reality, and he would die in that alignment. David's painting shows the moment of the execution with extraordinary emotional intelligence. Socrates, calm, almost radiant, reaches one hand toward the cup of hemlock while gesturing upward with the other, still in his final moments, teaching. His friends weep around him. His wife has been sent away so she will not see. This painting confronts us with a question that art is uniquely positioned to ask. What are we willing to live for? What are we willing to die for? Is truth among those things? For Socrates, the pursuit of truth was not a hobby or an intellectual pastime. It was the organizing principle of a life. To betray it, even to save his life, would have been to cease to be himself. Integrity, in its root meaning, means wholeness, the integration of what you believe and how you live. The death of Socrates is a painting about integrity as the final, most demanding expression of truth. So where does all of this leave us? Truth requires courage because it will question all our arrogant claims. Truth exists independent of our preferences and our fears. The mind's task is not to manufacture truth, but to align with it. And that alignment is the work of a lifetime. And truth is not comfortable. It strips away illusion. It demands that we look at what is actually there rather than what we wish were there. The great artists are always, in some sense, truth tellers. And truth telling requires a kind of courage that does not come naturally. You see, truth is not abstract, it is personal. But being personal doesn't mean it's relative. Truth finds us in the middle of our ordinary lives. It reaches toward us quietly, tentatively, with a hand that we can always ignore. And the question is whether we will turn toward it. The truth requires, listen carefully, truth requires a kind of conversion. Not necessarily in the religious sense, though that may be part of it, but in the most basic sense, a turning, a reorientation of perception. Because the problem is not only that truth is hidden from us, it is that we are not yet the kind of people who can see it or even want to see it. Recognizing truth when it appears requires slowing down, resisting the acceleration of our attention economy culture, which profits from our inability to be still. Recognizing truth when it appears requires letting go of illusion, being willing to have our comfortable certainties disturbed, our self-images questioned, our familiar frameworks challenged. And recognizing truth requires submitting. This is perhaps the most countercultural of all. Submitting to reality rather than demanding that reality submit to us. This week, I want to challenge all of us to engage with a political or religious perspective different from our own, even opposite that of our own. The goal is not simply to know truth as an intellectual achievement, as a philosophical position, as a spiritual credential. No, the goal is to live in reality as it truly is, to inhabit the world more fully, more honestly, more humbly.